Greetings everyone, and welcome back to Retrogaming. In this episode, we will be reviewing one of the most popular action games of the 80s, where the military is involved in a huge alien war that is about to destroy the entire universe. Yes, we are talking about the hardcore action game Contra. Now, this is one of the most popular action games in the NES library, but let's dig deep into it and explore what's inside. Now, Contra originally did not debut on the NES and Famicom. Contra was actually an arcade game that was released by Konami in 1987. It wasn't until a year later that a home version was ported to the NES and Famicom in 1988. But one difference was the NES version had only 8 levels, whereas the arcade had a total of 10 levels. Not to mention, when you compare the base levels in the arcade game and the NES version, the arcade version has more of a maze style, whereas the NES version has more of a linear style. And they also removed the time limit that was in the arcade. Now, the NES version of Contra in Europe and Australia was not the same for the ones released in the United States and Japan. The people in Europe and Australia instead got a game called Probotector. It was the exact same game, except the only difference was that instead of humans and aliens, they were replaced with robots. The reason the designers did this was because they felt that selling a game like Contra was too violent for younger audiences. So instead of having the game shooting humans and aliens, they made the game a robot war to tone down the violence. And the sequels of Contra continue this way in Europe and Australia up until Contra Legacy of War in 1996. The storyline is that you're on a mission to neutralize the alien terrorist group known as the Red Falcon organization that is planning to take over the world. And the group is led by the alien leader known as the Red Falcon. Now, one thing that is different between the Famicom and NES versions is that in the Famicom version, the manual says it takes place in the year 2633, while the NES version takes place in present time. Although, like I mentioned in my previous review, how are you supposed to know that's the story if you don't have the manual? They don't tell you that's the story in the game. You just press start and you're playing the game. No introduction or anything. Although I've heard the Famicom version actually does have an introduction to the game. But still, I have to say that's a little strange for an adventure game like this, to not have one. Now, to start off, you can play a 1 or 2 player game. Each player will take control of one of 2 soldiers. Player 1 will take control of Bill Mad Dog Riser, and player 2 will be Lance Scorpion Bean. Players must mow down as many enemies as they can while jumping over pits, dodging projectiles, and avoiding hazards to reach the boss awaiting at the end of the level. However, one drawback to this game is that it takes only 1 hit to kill you, which makes the game really difficult to beat. Although the good part is that after you die, they start you right where you left off. Unlike some games where after you die, you have to start at the beginning of the level, like Predator for example. Having a second player also helps decrease the challenge, but both players have to keep moving or else they won't go anywhere and the screen won't scroll to the next part of the level. Most of all, one major downside of having 2 players is on the waterfall stage in level 3. If one player is going up the level too fast, while your partner is still at the bottom, your partner will die from the bottom boundary of the screen. As we can tell, Contra is not an easy game to beat, with overcrowding enemies, various level bosses that have different attack patterns, and stage hazard. You're more than likely to lose a life along the way. You get 3 lives and 3 continues before getting game over. But there's one way to get around all that trouble. The famous Konami Code that you do at the title screen. You press up, up, down, down, left, right, BA. And when you push start, boom! 30 lives. This gives players an advantage for when they are ready to take on the challenging levels ahead of them. Contra also has some really smooth control. For instance, you're allowed to shoot in any direction you want depending upon how you're holding the D-pad. Firing while lying down also comes in great hand while trying to avoid projectiles from turrets and infantry. Firing the weapon is B while A is to jump. But in order to keep a steady stream of fire, you will need to keep tapping the B button, except for the machine gun upgrade. And this can get very tiring after a while on your thumb. So if you feel your fingers are getting too much of a workout, I say get a turbo controller. Just hold that B turbo button and fire away. There are also ways to power up your gun to help make your progress much smoother throughout the game. These include the machine gun, rapid fire, flamethrower, laser, and the famous spread gun. There's also the barrier, which is a temporary invincibility which makes you invulnerable to enemies and hazards for a short period of time. The way you acquire these upgrades is by either destroying one of the hatches with the eagles on them or shooting down one of these blimps. The machine gun is the only upgrade where you don't have to keep pressing the B button in order to use it, which is one thing I like about it. Not too much to say about it except that it will keep a steady flow of fire once you pick it up. The rapid fire will allow you to fire faster. The flamethrower fires fireballs in a circular motion to help get enemies on platforms above you. The laser is not the best power up to get, because if you pick it up and you keep pressing the fire button too fast, the laser will only travel a few inches from your gun. You will have to wait until the laser hits its target or moves off the screen in order to use it again. Although one good thing about the laser is that it is a powerful weapon, but it's not the best if you're looking for a long-range weapon. The spread gun is the most known weapon in the game. You can take out multiple enemies at once and cause major damage to the stage bosses. Once you grab this, you will be pretty much unstoppable unless you take a hit. Because once you do, you reset to your default rifle and you lose any power up that you previously had. Moving to graphics. Now I have to say, the graphics in this game are awesome. And they really show what the NES can do when it's put to its full potential. It was also a vast improvement when you compare it to the arcade. In the arcade, the graphics were good, although they really could have used a couple more colors to make it more appealing. They used so much gray, which makes it kind of bland. But when you look at the NES version, look how many colors are used in the first level alone. It really makes it eye candy and makes you want to play it more to see the rest of the game. So the NES version wins here. The only complaint I have with the NES version is, in the arcade, Bill and Lance were designed differently with different avatars. While in the NES version, they just used the same avatar. The only thing they changed was the color of their pants. Blue for Bill and brown for Lance, which can sometimes make it confusing in two-player mode to figure out who is who. Last, the sound. The soundtrack of Contra is one of the most recognizable. It may not be as popular as the Super Mario Bros. Soundtrack, but when people hear it, they say, "Ah, yes, Contra. Good stuff." Its soundtrack keeps you upbeat and prepped for battle, so you're ready to take down aliens and enemy troops. The sound effects are well done, too. The sounds of explosions, bombs, machinery, and the aliens are really good for an 8-bit system. And each of the special weapons has a different sound to it, just listen. And plus, that infamous sound of death. Now it's time to rate the game and give its overall score. Now before I do, I am not including the Konami Code for this rating. The reason for that is because that's a cheat. And we are going to be rating by how the game is to be played without using cheat codes and game genies. Now let's cut to the chase. First, the storyline. The storyline for Contra is good, but like Super Mario Bros., they don't tell you what it is, unless you read the manual. But most people today don't even have one, or you could buy the Famicom version. But that's another story. Anyway, for those reasons, the storyline gets a 7 out of 10. The gameplay is simple and it is a fun game, but the difficulty of Contra makes the game hard and frustrating, and because of its controller throwing difficulty, it gets a 6 out of 10. The graphics were a vast improvement over the arcade version and get a 10 out of 10. The soundtrack of Contra is a recognizable one, and the sound effects are very well done for 8-bit. They get a 10 out of 10. The control is very fluent, and you can fire in any direction you want, although the button mashing of the B button can wear on your thumb. So for that, it gets a 9 out of 10. And last, replayability. This game is very fun despite its difficulty. I'll pop this in my NES anytime. I'm sure a lot of people would say the same. Contra is definitely a replayable game. It gets a 10 out of 10. Now overall, I have to say, after looking at the aspects of this game, with its minor flaws, Contra's final rating gets an 8 out of 10. So, conclusion, Contra does have a few down specs to it, but it's still one of the best games in the NES library. If you have never played it, definitely give it a go. I highly recommend this to any gamer out there. Just make sure you know someone who owns an NES before doing so. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.